Hey, everybody. This is Emily, and you're about to watch episode number 5 of the Real Trilateral Commission with myself, Howdy McCloskey, and Michael Wan. And I'm making this sort of like addendum preamble that's going before the show because immediately when we finished recording, Laura alerted me by saying, "Why did you keep saying that Bruce Willis was in Bull Durham?" That I had made a mistake during the show and that apparently Bruce Willis was not in Bull Durham, that Kevin Costner was also in that. So he was in two baseball movies, Field of Dreams and Bull Durham. I, until this week, had never seen either. I watched Field of Dreams this week to do the show with Michael and Howdy. But in whatever reality that I came from, I believed that Bruce Willis had been in Bull Durham. We did talk about Mandela effects in this show. I've been having a lot of things in the last couple of weeks that one, depending on your perspective, and I'm not quite clear on what my perspective is, are Mandela effects or what's called reality shifting. I'm not sure which camp I fall more into, but I'm really considering, multiverse and reality shifting, maybe more than Mandela effects these days, although I'm not sure. I consider them all. A number of those things have been going on for me this week, and maybe this is one of them. And what is interesting about it is when we look it up, Kevin Costner was in Bull Durham, but fascinatingly enough, if you type in Bruce Willis, Bull Durham, the first entrance that comes up is from the IMDb. And in it says that Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis were both considered to play the main parts in Bull Durham. So I don't know what that's evidence of. I am not a movie buff, so I don't think I would have had any way of knowing that they were considered but not ultimately chosen. But why it's even super interesting is we did talk about moonlighting in there in relationship to Moonlight Graham, who was one of the characters in Field of Dreams. So, and I also noticed that Michael and Howdy did not correct me on this. So I'm curious as to if they remember it being Kevin Costner or Bull Durham or Kevin Costner or Bruce Willis who was in Bull Durham according to their memories. Anywho, I just wanted to sort of make the correction, but with the caveat. So my apologies. I'm not really a movie buff. Apparently in this reality, I got that wrong, but maybe there's another reality in which Bruce Willis was Bull Durham, or it was in Bull Durham. Anywho, I thought that was kind of interesting. I seem to have this bizarre circling around with Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis in my life as well. So it's funny that I make the mistake with those two. Anywho, enjoy the show. We thought it was a really fun and good one. And we'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Guys, I'm back. Laura just informed me that actually the reason that Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis turned down Bull Durham didn't get chosen was because of the moonlighting schedule. So here we have another overlay of those things. Okay, I'm really done this time. Bye. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. My good friends Howdy McCloskey and Michael Wan are here with me. This is Trilateral, the Real Trilateral Commission, number 5. And I think we got an interesting one for you this morning. It's been an interesting morning already for us, and we haven't even started the show yet. Howdy, Michael, how you doing?
Hi, Emily. Actually, much better after having the half-hour talk with you. We were discussing packages and receiving things, and so it's been an interesting half-hour conversation before we started.
Very good, Michael.
And it is absolutely beautiful outside where I am right now. balmy 72 degrees. Like, it's a little bit disappointing to be inside, but nonetheless, I had an early morning this morning. I was able to get outside. I was able to smell some of that fresh air, put my feet on the ground. So it has me primed for today. And like you said it was going to be an interesting one. But I mean, to be quite honest, that could be the subtitle of the show, the interesting one, because we always say that, but I'm particularly interested in this one today.
Well, this one might be explosive because it seems that our building may have been struck by lightning last night, right? Laura went upstairs to get some coffee before we started, and the entire sheets of glass were broken and fallen in, and they're trying to decide if it was struck by lightning or if somehow a bullet from outside up 7 stories high. I don't know. But anyway, maybe this will be a barn burner. Maybe it's portending something explosive here. So anyway.
A barn burner indeed.
Absolutely. All right. So Howdy, why don't you tell us, we're on a little bit more of a time crunch here because we had our chat, but I think we can compress this into an awesome little episode here. So Howdy, why don't you tell us
won't take long.
What you brought to us and why?
Right. So when I went on Monday looking for our story, the headlines were covered with Afghanistan. That's all that there was everywhere on that day. Then, of course, there was the standard COVID stuff. So that was what we had. That's all I could find. Oddly, on my walk down, I'd been thinking about the Field of Dreams baseball game that had just been played and sort of the strangeness of it and the presentation of the game. But that's not really a story, and it's from a few days ago. It's not from today. So as I was flipping through some other news papers, I came across that the famous Honus Wagner baseball card had just been sold for a now record $6.606 million. So they got to get the 3 6s in the sale price of the card. And so I thought, well, that right away is strange right away. I looked at the article itself. There wasn't too much in the couple articles I looked in per se, but the headline was enough to make me say, that's strange. And why do they want the sale happening now, right after the Field of Dreams baseball game? Something told me there's going to be a link between the game, the movie, Kevin Costner, Honus Wagner, this card. And I thought, okay, let's see what we can do with it.
All right. Well, that sounds good. We're going to depart from our usual format today. And even though it's Howdy's topic, Michael and I are going to go first. And Michael requested to go first. So Michael, take it away.
All right. So a little bit of context. So Howdy and I, since we first began communicating and talking about doing like some sort of show together, baseball has always been kind of like we flirted with that, and that's never actually materialized yet. So this is the materialization. This presentation has been a long time coming. And as Howdy indicated, like it is not like an arbitrary choice of us. And so like today's the day we're going to do baseball, as much as it is that the mechanism in which how we decided we're doing the show, like picking a story which is topical just a couple days before the recording, it's in the news. So the baseball story, as Howdy said, there are two different articles which are in play. It is the Field of Dreams, the actual embodiment or the manifestation of the movie coming into reality of an actual, if we build it, they will come. That came into play with this Field of Dreams game, an actual Major League Baseball game happening. But then it is highlighted by the sale of the baseball card and that really ominous number. Now, there's a lot of ways which we could go. And that's what I think is so much fun about what we do here is we all start from the same point and then we go in our own direction. And I just zeroed in on Field of Dreams, and I really wanted to get into, or I was driven into getting into the movie, which I probably haven't seen. Emily, you said you watched it last night. I haven't watched it for over a decade, but I'm familiar with it. You know, I grew up in the culture. So we're going to begin with the Field of Dreams as a movie, and we're going to see where this goes. So we begin by saying Field of Dreams. It was a movie that came out in 1989, and it was written, directed by this guy, Alden Robinson, but it is an adaptation of a novel called Shoeless Joe, which was written 7 years earlier. So we're going to begin by looking at this Shoeless Joe. We're not going to go that deep, but we're going to look at who this guy is who wrote it, this W.P. Kinsella. And the first cursory, the first glance which I had in, let me ask you a question. I'm seeing on my feedback that there's a lag in my recording. Are you guys having any trouble following me?
Nope. Okay,
good. So we're going to go into this book, Shoeless Joe. And whenever there is a translation from a book to a movie, there's always a little bit of changes. And one of the characters in the movie, the character who was played by James Earl Jones, and the character's name was Terrence Mann, Mann. In the book, that character was actually J.D. Salinger, the author. And for a variety of reasons, it was changed for the movie. But nonetheless, we're beginning with this. We're beginning from this point of J.D. Salinger tied into this storyline. And anyone who's familiar with J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, and particularly if you're watching this show, you're probably very connected or very aware of the connection between Catcher in the Rye and all of these assassins, whether it was the guy who shot Ronald Reagan or the guy who shot John Lennon. Those are just like probably the two best known examples, but there's a connection between Catcher in the Rye, and there's been a lot of research on that, which then goes a little bit deeper into looking at Catcher in the Rye as maybe an MK Ultra trigger or something along there. There's some strange connections with that. So like that's the first thing. As soon as I see that, that's the first kind of like red flag to me that, all right, there's, all roads lead to MK Ultra and CIA, or at least that's kind of where I like to go with these storylines. So we got that with Catcher in the Rye and J.D. Salinger as one of the characters in the original Shoeless Joe, which is the name of the novel, which Field of Dreams is based upon. And just to point out, the J.D. Salinger is not just the author of Catcher in the Rye, but he also has an intelligence background. And here we see right here, what few of Salinger's fans ever fully comprehend is the man's extensive military and intelligence employment. He worked for the OSS in highly classified projects. And, we can see all that. So like there are multiple connections with Salinger and CIA and intelligence and all that sort of stuff. But that's not the only weird thing which we're going to look at with this. The author of Shoeless Joe is W.P. Kinsella. And as you're aware, in the Field of Dreams, in both the book which it's based upon and in the movie, the main character's name is also Kinsella. So we've got two tie-ins with this name Kinsella, but that's not the only place. Kinsella is also a name which is used twice within the work of J.D. Salinger. It is a secondary or tertiary character within Catcher in the Rye itself, and there is another character in another book written by Salinger, A Girl in 1941 with No Waist. That's what the book was called, but the name Kinsella. So we're seeing this name Kinsella being used. Both were told in a fictitious sort of environment, but in this strange kind of synchronistic way that the author who wrote the book, he also was named, his name happens to be Kinsella. And the author says himself that he did not realize that Kinsella was a name used in Salinger's work until after he came up with the idea of using J.D. Salinger as a a plot device within the writing of Shoeless Joe, or the predecessor of what would be of Field of Dreams. So we're going to start with that. And then we're going to move on to, and we'll leave it at there for a moment. And now we're going to move on to the person who wrote the adaptation and also directed the film Field of Dreams. And we see this guy is, his name is Phil Alden Robinson. And he, I think it says he was nominated, got some nominations for Field of Dreams. He's done some other films as well. But I want to point out that he's an insider. He's currently a vice president of the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences. This is the organization which is behind the Academy Awards. So like, if you think about what the movie industry does, and then even more within popular culture, and then more importantly, what the Academy Awards is within the movie industry, this guy is, he may not be the top dog, but he's definitely like, he's at the level of a vice president title. So he's a player, he's an insider. And we go and we look at this guy's filmography, and I'm going to just pull out a couple of interesting films. Fletch, he did that. He did Field of Dreams, but he also did a couple other films. So like that I want to be a little bit more specific on. So Field of Dreams he did in 1989, and then in 92 his next kind of like real big film was Sneakers. And Sneakers was a Robert Redford and River Phoenix film, and it's all about the NSA and CIA. And we can go and look at another film which Robinson did, and he did the adaptation of a Tom Clancy novel called Sum of All Fears. Tom Clancy, all of these like really, really big name, highly popular in the culture, CIA storylines. I mean, they're always like told from the inside, whether it was like, the author was part of work prior to being an author, was involved with intelligence, or he worked hand in hand with the intelligence agencies to kind of like create his characters. So the point I'm just trying to make again is we can see that this author or this director and the screenplay author has a continuity within intelligence movies and that sort of stuff. So these are just kind of like, I'm putting this out there. This isn't the main part of this presentation, but I want to begin with that. And then we move on. A couple interesting things about the movie of Field of Dreams. When you look at 25 facts of no one knows about the Field of Dreams, they say a young Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were extras in the films, but they were cut out of it. And you're like, why is that even a story? We can't even prove that they were in, but nonetheless, we got Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. I talk about them a lot, but, won't really go into it. But the one thing that really jumped out was their role in the movie Dogma, where they played fallen angels. And also the idea within the movie, The Field of Dreams, where you hear this voice, which says these kind of like hypnotic trances to both the characters and the audience who's watching it. Part of the movie's lore is no one knows whose voice is actually tied to that, quote unquote character, the character that says, build it and he will come. And Kinsella, the author of the book, he says, and he's on record many times, that it was the voice of Ed Harris who is running the show of this film. And I want to point out this other interesting synchronicity in the fact that Ed Harris plays the God character, the man who's running the scenes in the Truman Show. So we kind of have like a link in the subtext of the Hollywood stories of Ed Harris being this voice that's behind the scenes, that's scripting the narrative. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go into another character in the film. So I talked a little bit about this Terrence Mann character, who was played by James Earl Jones, but was in the original book was actually J.D. Salinger. But J.D. Salinger, who is supposedly a real person, he has no involvement with the writing of the book. In fact, that's the reason why he was not used in the film, because they were worried about the filmmakers were worried about there being lawsuits, so they changed their name. But there's another character in the film who is based upon a real person. And so in the film, this character is Archie Moonlight Graham. And so here we see Archie Moonlight Graham, who was born in 1876, died in 65, was an American professional baseball player. And he was popularized in Shoeless Joe by the novel by Kinsella, and then in the film Field of Dreams. And it was played by Burt Lancaster, and it was Burt Lancaster's final role. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, why that's significant a little bit later. But within the movie and within the book, what happens is we see the character of Moonlight Graham. We see him as an old man, but in the mysticism of this Field of Dreams, he then transports back into a younger version of himself. So this Graham character is important because he's one of the really important symbols of, like, whether we want to call it time travel or just the idea of like time not being linear. But now we're going to go and look a little bit of who is this Archie Graham in real life. And when you go and you look at his history, and sure enough, this guy, he became very well known in Minnesota as a longtime doctor. He was known as Doc Graham, and he was beloved by the community. And before that, he was a baseball player, and was primarily a minor league baseball player. And he got to play in one game, and he never got a chance to bat. That is the storyline within the book and the movie. And that kind of happened in real life. He did get to play in one game. It says right here in his Wikipedia page in May of 1905 on June 29th, he was playing for the Giants, and he came up to bat, and he didn't get a hit. But then what I want to point out, which was interesting, is after that, he was cut by the Giants and he was sent to the minor leagues. And where did he go? He went to play for the Scranton Miners, because all roads lead to Scranton. We got to throw that out there. Yep. And in looking at more information on Moonlight Graham as a real individual, as opposed to just a fictional version of it, the few things that I could find about him was this right here. It says his handwriting was so bad, even for a doctor, that the local Masonic lodge made him practice his signature 3 or 4 times before letting them sign their lodge's bylaws. So in the very, very small piece of history which we have of this Graham guy, they work into it that he is involved within the Masonic tradition. We can take that any way we like. Moving on with Graham, we could see that Graham, he comes originally from North Carolina, and his family is very strongly related to North Carolina. In fact, the Reverend Billy Graham is also said to be a distant cousin of Archie Graham being the Moonlight character. So we go and we look a little bit more at the Wikipedia page, and we see that this Archie Graham, baseball player, time traveler, Scranton miner, his brother is also a person of interest as it relates to history. And his brother is Frank Porter Graham, and he was the president of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the flagship campus of the University of North Carolina educational system. And looking a little bit about this guy, Frank Graham, he was a bit player on the international stage. He was involved with the United Nations, and this little piece right here I wanted to point out it's actually talking about someone known as Watts Hills, who I do not know, but it was saying how this guy Watts Hills was the field secretary of the Foreign Policy Association, an organization director of the Council on Foreign Relations, a founding member of the Century Group. And in this particular article, it was talking about how he was connected to this other guy, Francis Pickens Miller. But the connection which they make between Miller and Watts Hill is that they were introduced through their mutual friend of Frank Porter Graham, which then implies, that Frank Graham was like involved with Council on Foreign Relations and all that stuff. So Laura's giving me 5 minutes. I might go 7 minutes over. I'm sorry, Laura, but I'm going to go through all this sort of stuff. I'll heat up. So now I want to tie this into the other part of the other story. We've got the baseball card here for $6.6 million. If you look a little bit deeper into it, you see this card was issued by the American Tobacco Company. And so we look a little bit deeper at the American Tobacco Company, and it was founded by J.B. Duke. This is where Duke University gets its name from. And if you're familiar with North Carolina and colleges and universities, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Duke are always like, they are, they're connected primarily because of their basketball programs, their academic excellence, and the fact that they are both located in a very similar place. And let's go a little bit deeper into this J.B. Duke. And J.B. Duke, it says in his Wikipedia bio that his entrance into the cigarette industry, that's where this card comes from it came with a cigarette pack. It came in 1879 when he entered to a new business rather than face competition in the shredded pouch tobacco business against the Bull Durham brand. So let's go and look at this because it all circles back. So Field of Dreams stars Kevin Costner. What was the film that he made before that? Bull Durham. So now we've got connection back to Bull Durham. And this Archie Graham, his brother was the president of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And here's Chapel Hill. Here's Durham, North Carolina. We see they're 10 miles apart. We see in physical space, they're all connected. And so now I'm sorry, it's too good, but I'm going to go fast. So what the movie is ultimately about is we are connecting timelines. We're connecting timelines from when the movie was built or came out in 1989 to when it became manifest. And so let's go look in 2021. We've got the manifestation, which happened on April 12th, 2021, of the baseball game, which actually occurred, the Major League Baseball game that occurred in the field that was built in the Iowa cornfields. 3 days later, we've got the fall of Afghanistan. We can see that they closed the State Department, they closed their embassy. Also, a couple key points I want to point out, like about a month earlier, we had the assassination of the president of Haiti. And then a little bit earlier than that, we also had some stuff that was going on with some strange space missions with SpaceX, which happened. Let's go look at 1989, the year of the release. So of the movie, so in February on Imbolc, this was when in 1989, this is when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan. And we can see this is when the United States closed their embassy in Afghanistan. And we could see on April 4th, that's when there was an assassination attempt of the president of Haiti. And we could also see this is when the Space Shuttle Columbia takes off in a secret 5-day mission. So we're seeing all of these parallels happening. 1989 was a crazy year, and that's what it's linking into. So I'm going to go through this real quick because the ending of this is fantastic. But this is when George Bush, the senior, was sworn into president. Ted Bundy is executed. This is the year of the revolutions. This is when we have Tiananmen Square. We have revolutions throughout Eastern Europe fighting the communist regime as it's falling. We look at everything which is happening right now. This is the year of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This is the year of the Central Park jogger case. This all happened on April 19th. USS Iowa has an explosion, which is we got another Iowa connection. We want to go right here where I'm just going to drop some key ones. This is the year of the 200th anniversary of French Revolution because revolution is in play. This is the beginning, the first flight of the stealth bomber. We've got Rebecca Schaefer, who was murdered by an obsessive fan. And Rebecca Schaefer is her murderer, her assassin was also tied to the Catcher in the Rye. We've got here, this is the 1989 World Series where the earthquake happened. We've got the invasion of Panama happened. We've got the whole, decapitation of the ruler of Romania happened. All of this crazy stuff happened in 89. And 89 was also a year of firsts. Game Boy came out for the first time. Nintendo's like portable player. We had our first flip phone. We had the first high definition television, the world's first internet connection. Transhumanism is tried on human beings for the first time. GPS, the first satellite is put into orbit. Then we've got all of this, social firsts are happening within gender and racial barriers have been broken. Ron Brown becomes the first Black chairman of a major U.S. political party. The first time in planet Earth, a government recognizes civil unions between same-sex relationships. Doug Wilder becomes the first Black governor of a U.S. state. David Dinkins becomes New York City's first Black mayor. Colin Powell, all of these guys. We've got Barbara Harris, the first woman to become a bishop of the Episcopal Church. So 1989 is a year of firsts. It's a year of revolution. We see all of that is tied in. And now I'm going to wrap it up right now to make it a little bit I'm going to hit this. I typed in, you go and you look at the days between the release of the movie and the baseball game. It was 1178 days. I typed in 1178 into Google, typed mystical, and what came up was this map. And there's a little hint of what's going on because we see it shows us the Bretton Woods Elementary School. We're talking about revolutions here, my friends, and not always the ones which you want to cheer for. So now this is how I'm going to end it up. There's this thing which is popular with baseball players. It's called APBA. And it was very popular in the 60s and 50s and 70s. And it was kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons game, a way of playing baseball, and was immensely popular. Here we can see some of the images, and it was founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And as all you folks know, I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We could see this game was enthusiasts include George Bush. We talked both senior and junior, Eisenhower, all these folks. And we also see that Field of Dreams was Burt Lancaster's last film. And Burt Lancaster was considered one of the greatest film actors in Hollywood's classical time period. So we look a little bit deeper. We see that the guy who the guy who founded APBA, his company was located on 101 Millersville Road. And even more interesting, I don't just live in Lancaster County, I live in Millersville. So I'm going to show this for you right here. This is where Millersville is. This is Lancaster City. And I just so happen to know this. This is not like public knowledge for most people in Lancaster, but someone told me this years ago, and I've been sitting on this for years because I never had an appropriate time to share this, but I'm going to share it right now. The guy who invented APBA, and it was very, very popular, he lived right here, and he had a house right on Conestoga Country Club. And here we can see his Conestoga Country Club. We can see it's right by Millersville. We saw that his business was on Millersville Road. It's less than 2 miles away. And when we go and we zoom in a little bit, so this is Google Earth. This is the screenshot of it. This is Conestoga Country Club. And right here on West Ridge Drive is where this man's house was. And this man, because he loved baseball so much, he had built on his own property right here. His house is right here, and this is his backyard. He built into his property something very, very special. And he had written into his deed that when he sold his house, this very important thing that he built for all of eternity can never be destroyed. And what do you think it was that this man built? As you could see, the golf course right here. This is the house right here on West Ridge. And if you look like really close, we've got this man's field of dreams in physical reality, was built here back in the 80s. And so it is with that, my friends, that Burt Lancaster in Lancaster County, where we actually have another field of dreams less than 2 miles from where not necessarily Terrence Mann, but if you flip that M to a W, you got Michael Wan, and that's where I find myself living. So that, my friends, is my presentation. I apologize for going over a little bit, but I could not cut out any of that good stuff.
That was good stuff, dude. I don't know how to, like, there's part of me that's just like, let's just wrap it up and go home, because that's going to be tough to compete with. But I'm going to play with what you did here, Michael. So Howdy, would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first on response? You're muted, Howdy.
You're muted, Howdy.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you with that headphone. Yeah, I think you have to disconnect that.
Yeah, so I just take it off. Go ahead, Emily, go first.
Okay, so just real quick so that we don't lose it, can you bring back up that map you just had? Not the last one, but the one before it.
Of Lancaster?
Yeah, not that one. That one.
This one?
Yeah, that one. And just because it's always interesting, the number of things that have been part of either this conversation that we've been recording or our conversation prior to recording that show up just in this map, right? So we have Duke Street over here. We have Wilson Drive over here. And we were talking about the Wilson bag. There was a Wilson bag in the movie that I thought Michael would like to get his hands on, but also—
I just want to tell you this right now. I literally used to live on Wilson Drive. 590 Wilson Drive was my address.
We have Wilson over here, and Howdy was mumbling it that this was a Wilson before you even got here this morning. And then there's Abbeville Drive, right? Which we don't have Abby, but the little girl in the movie is Gabby. Her real name is Gabby Hoffman. And there's also a guy who created LSD named Abby Hoffman, or was one of the, not I think he created it, but he was one of the first sort of, scientists working with LSD, right? With LSD, which has also been implicated in lots of projects, looking glasses, time travel, bilocation, all of the ability to be in two places or two times at once, all of that kind of stuff. Right.
So real quick, I also, when I lived in the church, that was on Abbeville Road.
Okay. All right.
I was living in the Abbey.
Okay. So this, Michael and I, for the entirety of time that we've been working together, we have recognized that the same information always seems to be arranged around us in different fashions, like the same words, names. They might be referring to something totally else, but we can always find them. Like it's part of finding our center. I just wanted to comment on that before I kind of forgot and moved away from that. So, all right, so you can take that down, Michael. So I have several pages of notes here, as many notes on your presentation as I have for my own, probably more. So you talked about Salinger's, Salinger being connected military intelligence, OSS, all of that kind of stuff. In this movie, we have Mann, and Mann had been an author that was very involved with social justice, right? And that's where a lot of quote unquote intelligence has moved now, starting, way back with COINTELPRO, but we're seeing the culmination of that infiltration of the activist and social justice and whatever. So in some ways, Mann is the modernized version then of what Salinger was, right? Like he may be a person who was either an intelligence asset or was a real deal, but saw what happened all around him. There was a lot of agents around him, and that's why he had no desire to be part of it anymore. And he went and hid in his little apartment in Boston and whatnot. So that whole social activism, COINTELPRO, kind of matches that, right? And then one of the things that sort of there is a deep history of politics in Iowa, they have the first straw poll and the caucus and all that kind of stuff. and there are staunch Democrats there and deeply conservative Republicans, and that sort of battle and argument back and forth between them has sort of always been part of it. And for some reason, I don't know why I wrote that down right when you were talking about something. I don't remember what what it was in reference to. You talked about the movie Sneakers and it being about sort of decryption, about being decryption. We've been talking a lot about cryptosteganography in relation to that Illuminati glass review that we sort of looked at, right? And so that who was the one who was in, the guy who did the movie, the guy who created the movie was also the creator of the movie Sneakers, right? And so that's about decryption. So to me, that's the nod that his entire career of the works he's done are codes. They're all steganography, right? And we've been talking a lot about that. You showed the godlike Bubble Boys, The Truman Show, and Dogma, right? And kind of played with this idea of a bubble, right? Of course, right now we're living in bubbles, right? To a certain extent. If you go to any of these sporting events now, like at the Olympics or the tennis tournaments, they create bubbles around them that the players have to sort of be in. If we refer back to the episode where we talked about said previous gift, it was about blowing bubbles, and we even used on the cover a bubble that was kind of like a dome or a glass bead. And I'm going to get into, in my presentation, a little bit of how some of this may connect to the work of FPV Angel, which Michael and I have talked about a lot. And so there's your angels, your fallen angels, which FPV Angel, I don't know if you're familiar with their work, Howdy, it's related to some, you guys have some crossover in common, but their theory is that what we think of as being angels are particle accelerators, right? And the way that they're referred to in like religious and mythological texts, things that are referred to as angels, it's really these particle accelerators that are part of the construct of the earth. You talked about Frank Graham at UNC Chapel Hill. Of course, right now, they sort of float it, but they try and hide it. Like the center of all this crap we're living through right now really started at UNC Chapel Hill with Frank Barrick and his gain of function research, right? And then there's also a senator from South Carolina named Lindsey Graham, and I'm wondering what because you were talking about North Carolina, but Lindsey Graham is there in South Carolina. And then we're talking about Moonlight Graham, right? So Michael and I have talked many times recently about the moon and even about moonlight and moonlighting, and of course, Bruce Willis. And we've decoded a lot of his works. And when we first started, when you sent the articles, and I've never seen Field of Dreams, I don't watch a lot of movies, I was confusing it with Bull Durham. So I was wondering if Bruce Willis was in Field of Dreams. And then I realized, no, it's Kevin Costner. Bruce Willis must be in Bull Durham, but I didn't realize Kevin Costner is also in Bull Durham. So we have this connection between those two and some interesting kind of coding going on in their careers. I'm not super familiar with Kevin Costner, but I know he's in Dances with Wolves, which we've talked a lot about wolves, Michael. And I also know he's in Waterworld, and we spent a lot of time talking about underwater issues and different kinds of things related to that. So now suddenly I have an interest in Kevin Costner, who also grew up in the city where my mom lives, right? And it's kind of well known around there for having gone to high school there and whatnot. So one of the things we've talked about with Bruce Willis and moonlighting is the very strange conversation I had with Bruce Willis back in like 2003 or 4 or whatever it is, when he talked to me about the moon, basically about the lunar equinox or something like that, right? Moonlight Graham had his only baseball action on June 29th. That's my birthday. My birthday is June 29th. That's the day he played. So in the movie, they go to Iowa. Laura used to live in Iowa, and we were just there, like visiting her brother. Her brother lives there. They go to Boston. My sister lives in Boston, right? They went to Minnesota. Laura used to live there. But then you have this reference to all of this stuff going on in Scranton, right? And I'm going to get into Scranton. Everything for Michael and I often leads back to Scranton, but I'm going to get into Scranton in one of my things that I have a totally different thing coming up in Scranton. Then you talked about, so Duke, we have Duke, which is also a university in North Carolina and was there on the street in the town that you just showed us. And then you went into, so we had Bull Durham, Field of Dreams. Bruce Willis was in Bull Durham. You showed us Durham, North Carolina with the other guy at the university in Durham. But one of the things, unless you're a gymnastics buff, people wouldn't know, one of the most underappreciated gymnasts ever. Her name was Diane Durham. She died earlier this year. We're not sure. That was never really made clear if she died of the virus or something else, right? But there was a lot of talk about how she never got the justice that she was due, right? She was one of the first highly successful Black American gymnasts, and she was really much better at the time than Mary Lou Retton, but she got injured before the Olympics and didn't get to compete. And she never really got the attention that people feel she deserved for moving Black women forward in sports, particularly gymnastics. But she died last year, or was it earlier? It was earlier this year, I think. And there was a lot of conversation about justice and racial justice around her death. And you'll see why I'm bringing up gymnastics, because it's going to get into some of the stuff around Honus Wagner. But we're talking about the Space Shuttle Columbia. Of course, Columbus has come up over and over for Michael and I in relation to another possible gift that we are not sure was a gift from our friend who sends gifts. And then the email this morning about the rabbit in the moon that I mentioned when we were talking from the girl said that she saw a rabbit in the moon in Columbus, Ohio. So we're always sort of circling around this Columbus kind of topic. You had the story about the Central Park jogger, right? And remember earlier, like last year, maybe it was even around April 19th or something last year, there was a story of the Karen in Central Park who was like getting mad because the guy didn't have his mask on. So that's there. There was the mention of Northrop Grumman in one of the things that you brought up. I mentioned Northrop Grumman in our pre-show talk when Howdy was asking about how the sausage party would relate to things. And I said that I thought I had been to a party that was like on a stage set that Northrop Grumman set up. And then Rebecca Schaefer, right? You talked about Rebecca Schaefer and I had forgotten about her. And there was the J.D. Salinger reference, but I remember when the Rebecca Schaefer thing happened, my cousin Marky, who was an actress as well of the similar time frame, was very disturbed by that. My cousin Marky just died this past week, the same time that this game was going on and all of this kind of stuff, right? And her husband was really into baseball. Like he used to like go to fantasy baseball stuff in Vero Beach every year. He would go to the baseball camp and whatnot. So that's kind of interesting for me. You talked about the earthquake in Haiti, right? And then there was also, so you talked about the earthquake at the World Series and the Haitian assassination back then. Well, there was a Haitian assassination and a Haitian earthquake this past week, right? There was a huge earthquake in Haiti. You talked about the Game Boy, the flip phones, and we're talking in the televisions and the GPS. We've just been talking about like ARGs and virtual reality neighborhoods and this sort of augmentable alternative reality kind of stuff. Also, Motorola, which was the first person to create like the flip phone, I think, and they have one that's the most famous called the Razr. There's like a new, like just the other day, for some reason, I got pulled into reading an article about how the Razr phone is back. They have like a smart Razr phone. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, where are we looping back to? That early 2000s where the Razr phone was. A lot of social firsts were happening, all the falls that you were talking about. I can't read my own writing. Let's see, the Bretton Woods in the movie Field of Dreams, the guy was talking a couple times about Tricky Dick, right? And so, of course, Tricky Dick is related to all of that period of time where that stuff was going on. And then you said Dungeons and Dragons. You were talking about APBA, right? The Dungeons and Dragons version of baseball. Like for some reason, the week that I didn't have my phone, I saw this guy at this restaurant wearing a shirt, and it became very clear that he walked through this restaurant in a very odd manner, wearing this shirt because he wanted me to notice his shirt. And his shirt said D20 News Network. So when I went and looked up D20 News Network, these people were like doing sort of what you and I do, Michael, but a completely different version. They're into alternative reality gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, and its relationship to autism, right? And you just said Dungeons and Dragons. And then oddly enough, so I saw this guy like on Tuesday, and then I saw him again on Thursday by the flower plant, by the baseball field, wearing the same shirt, standing at the entrance to the pocket park where I say the cat cult is, which happens on the full moon night, right? Standing there wearing the same shirt, like he's just wanting me to notice his shirt, right? And I had done a little, by this point, I had looked into it a little bit, what that was. But anyway, that's the D20 News Network. And then the last part was you showed this field in Millersville. And last week when this story of the Field of Dreams was the big story in the news, I was listening to them talk about it on the Tennis Channel, and they were showing about a gentleman who I think it was also in Iowa, but if it wasn't in Iowa, it was somewhere in the Midwest, who for some reason was never able to get to go to Wimbledon. So he built a grass court in his own field there. He had a field. He built the most beautiful grass court, right? And they were talking about, it's still there. Some of the top players have been there to play, kind of thing. But there seems to be that for tennis as well. And I talk about that, and there's a lot of things going on with tennis. But anyway, this idea of people just, building stuff and it will come. I think this is sort of, in some ways, part of the future we're headed for as traveling to places becomes more challenging, more difficult, and restrictions are all abound. Like, it's going to be the inversion, right? Instead of us going places, we're going to have to make things and hope people come, right? Kind of thing. So I don't know. It was interesting. They had that story on the grass court in Iowa as well. So that's my response to your stuff. That was an excellent presentation, Michael. It felt like a clown verse. I didn't think it was ever going to end. It was all phenomenal.
Yes, it was quite excellent, and I don't want to take up more time, let Emily get in. The only point that I sort of came across that I wanted to bring up was when you were talking about Moonlight Graham and that little piece at the bottom where it was talking about the handwriting and the signature, the last piece of that little thing, but which you didn't share, was although his career in Major League Baseball was short, he rubbed shoulders with Christy Mathewson, slugger Ty Cobb, and Ted Williams. Okay. So it would make sense why he would rub shoulders with Christy Mathewson, because he played with them in 1905 on the Giants. Why would he have rubbed shoulders with Ty Cobb? He didn't play against Cobb, certainly. So where did he rub shoulders with a player with Ty Cobb? And Ted Williams didn't start playing until 1937 or 38. So how did Moonlight Graham rub shoulders with Ted Williams with the Boston Red Sox? So that last sentence has me asking a lot of questions of, well, how is Moonlight Graham so connected to players that he really shouldn't be connected to other than Christy Mathewson?
Right. That's a fantastic point. Like, because he was like just on the outskirts of professional baseball. It's not like, you're one superstar from one era talking to another superstar. Like, he was a good minor league player. Like, that's the best that you could say. He batted like 325 for the Scranton Miners. That was his thing. You're right. That doesn't on the surface. There's more to that story, is the one thing we can say for certain.
Yeah, there has to be. So beyond that, I'll just throw in a Wilson one for you, and then Emily can start. The first two women that I dated in my life when I was like very young, they were born on the same day, in the same year, in the same city, in the same hospital. The second of those two women was a Wilson who had a twin sister. So throw that into your Montauk Project insights, people who are watching. And I don't know how that ties in with me, but it was weird even when I was like 20 years old and trying to figure it all out. It's even more weird now.
Yeah.
I'll add this. Going back to probably age 20, so that was 30 years ago. I've probably been in 5 like serious relationships in that period of time. Every single one of those women either was raised, born, or conceived in the same city, which I've never been to. And I've asked myself a very similar question, like, what the hell is that?
That's straight, yeah.
So, Howdy, couple of things. So, I have a couple of other females that I've been close to in different kinds of ways in my life that all have the same birthday as Laura. And not necessarily year, but date. One of them I think might be the same year, but right. And one of those people has Wilson in their genealogy, and I as well have a Wilson in my genealogy, right? And I was born at the sort of legendary Cedars Hospital, right? And we've dug in many times to what was going on there with like a lot of the celebrities, their kids are born there and they have a lot of twins, right? And sometimes one of the twins dies. My mom had a very strange procedure when she was pregnant with me. And like the question has often been, was there a twin that was removed and whatever, right? The Wilson is on my mom's side of the family. I don't, there's always a Wilson, dude, right? There's always a Wilson. So it's interesting. And then to your point about how was he rubbing shoulders with this person, right? So Moonlight Graham, like he's the one who's most clearly a time traveler in the movie, right? Yeah. There's obviously Kevin Costner has his time travel experience. James Earl Jones is about to have his at the end. The baseball players are doing it. But he seems to be the most transcendent. Like that's his role, is he's the time traveler that sort of connects all of this stuff together. And Moonlight Graham, so we've talked about Bruce Willis and his conversation with me about the moon, and he was in Moonlighting, and the quite a few of the movies he's been in, including Looper, including a few others, he's played a time traveler. He was also in Bull Durham, which I was confusing with this, right? And so I think maybe the connection is that this guy is sort of transcendent through space and time, right? Like this Moonlight Graham character. And I think we can get into a case for baseball being sort of, you know, and James Earl Jones even says it at the end of the movie, right? That baseball, like the baseball marks time, right? That the way, like, I think that's the last comment he makes before he goes and walks off into the field, is that baseball is the mark of time that connects the past to the future, connects the generations and whatnot, right? So anyway, okay. So shall I get started?
Yep.
Hard to follow you up on this one, Michael. So I'm going to start with the Honus Wagner. And first, I just have to say, and especially in relationship to Egypt and Howdy and whatever, when I hear Honus, I think Horus, right? So I'm curious about if there's anything going on with that. But I did a little bit of reading. I read the article you sent, and then I looked at just a very few other things, right? And in the thing he seems most well known for is that he's associated with bringing sponsorship into baseball and endorsement deals, right? So the commercialization of something that had previously been more of like a competitive sport, right? It was really more about, while there's always an entertainment aspect to sports, like the actual game playing in the sport had been sort of, at least the way people perceived it, the point. And then suddenly it became this industry on another level that had to do with sponsorship and endorsement deals. Right. And then in another article, I found somebody like another Hall of Famer had referred to him as nearly the perfect player, that he could do pretty much anything. Right. So I found that in another article. The card that is being sold for card T206 for 6.606 or whatever $1 million was actually his manager card. It was from when he was a manager as opposed to when he was a player. And there was another article on ESPN, this was the top article about this story, that said that this baseball card was the GOAT baseball card of all time and would always be. So this tacks on to this conversation that's been going on all year about who's the GOAT. Is it LeBron James? Is it Federer, Nadal, Djokovic? Is it Simone Biles? Now, Simone Biles is the only one who's announced herself as the GOAT. Right? She announced herself as the GOAT. She has literally the little goat Baphomet or whatever on her leotard. And I've detailed in some other programs that I've done, we had this very strange sort of her fall this summer that to me looked pre-planned as another commoditization of sports. She is by far probably the most commercialized gymnast that there's been in terms of like ability to make money and endorsements and things like that. But one of the things that happened in the space between when the Olympics were supposed to happen in 2020 and when they ended up happening in 2021 is that she had been planning this tour called the GOAT Tour, Gold Over America Tour. And when it didn't happen in 2020, like this tour kind of grew into something like a little different even. And before, like back in April or May of this year, it was announced that one of the things this tour would focus on, it was announced in a very hidden place on Business Wire website, which is a Berkshire Hathaway like company, that this would focus on social media and mental health. Oh, well, that's pretty convenient that she has this strange occurrence at the Olympics that wasn't, if you really look at what it wasn't a mental health issue. She was having like gymnasts get up against this. Sometimes you like lose your feeling of stuff like that. That is not a mental health issue. And people can say whatever they want about Simone Biles. She does not have a mental health problem. She, you could call it choking. You could call it like, this is something that happens to athletes. And she was disoriented in the air, but that was conflated with mental health to sell a product that had been in the works, sponsored by Athleta, sponsored by all these other companies for several months before this happened. So now like she is the new face of this combination of like mental health awareness and athletics. Naomi Osaka's related to it too a little bit. But you know, she's really going to be the poster girl for that. And one of the things this tour is going to focus on is a much more entertainment aspect of gymnastics, right? So I think we're going to see her doing all of her big skills again, but not at a competitive format. It's going to be put together like an Ice Capades or like a Hollywood movie. And I've also talked about how I think one of the things we're going to start seeing with this is like the VR or the augmenting aspect of it, where instead of just like going and watching the show, people can actually pay to be in the VR. Some kind of camera is going to be on her and they can feel what it feels like to do all the moves she's doing and stuff like that. Robert and I have talked about that in terms of baseball as well too, my friend Robert Phoenix. So it was interesting. They called that the GOAT. They've called her the GOAT. They're saying she's still the GOAT, even though she didn't actually do much at the Olympics. In fact, that makes her more goaty than any GOAT ever in the history of anything, right? And the thing with his GOAT card is the reason it's worth so much money is because he didn't want to be associated with tobacco. So he made them pull it out of circulation, which made it worth more money. So forever, he will be associated with that which he didn't want to be associated with, right? And here you have someone like Simone Biles, who is arguably the best gymnast that's ever lived. But for the rest of her life now, she's going to be associated with mental health. And whether that was her decision or the people that run her, I thought that was kind of interesting, right? So here was another aspect of the GOAT conversation and the commercialization, the commodification of sports, and the putting together of things that wouldn't naturally seem to go together. I think we're experiencing a complete break from sports in the competitive nature that we've always thought of them. And it's going to be turning more towards interactivity and more towards entertainment than it already was, right? Like it's always been entertainment and it's always been commodified, but now it's really going to be like not much different than like video games or Disneyland or stuff like that, right? Let's see. I think that's pretty much what I have on Horace there. Or Honus, Honus, not Horace. So that was my thought on the Honus story. And then the Field of Dreams. All right, so I'm only going to touch on this a little bit because I want to protect the person's privacy. But last week on either Wednesday or Friday, I can't remember which, someone who's in the Project Kids group told related stories, 2 different stories that were circling around the same topic, but were not completely connected. And the central character of one story was Ray Liotta, and the central character of the other story was Joe Jackson, not Shoeless Joe Jackson, a different Joe Jackson, right? I'm 100% this person has no relationship to baseball, doesn't care about any of this stuff, doesn't even know about these stories, right? So this was like either on Wednesday or Friday. And after this conversation was had at the group, somebody else who's part of the group sent me an email saying, you know, it's weird what was being talked about in the group because there's this thing that keeps coming up in my feed, these videos about this Field of Dreams game. And Ray Liotta was in Field of Dreams. He played Shoeless Joe Jackson, right? So like there was that sort of connective tissue. And already by the point she sent that, a few things had come up in my feed about this Field of Dreams game, like some of the Gematria channels were doing stuff on it, but I hadn't watched it or read any articles. So even before that was in my awareness and outside of anything related to these movies, there was this connection made between the idea of Ray Liotta and Joe Jackson. And the way we were talking about it did sort of relate to immortality, eternity, time travel, some stuff different than this, but some similarities, right? So that was kind of how it entered into my sphere. And then Howdy comes up with it on Monday. And I was like, of course, right? Of course. Let's see. I don't generally watch movies. I don't really care for movies very much. I have a hard time staying awake, but for some reason I decided we needed to watch this movie and I actually really enjoyed it and I stayed awake the whole time. It became pretty clear to me, like the moment the movie started, even before there was any indication of it, that this was going to be sort of a time travel movie. And I was kind of surprised because you think of that as more like science fiction movies or space or futuristic kind of movies. In one of the early scenes where he is hearing that if you build it, he will come, right? And then he looks over and he has sort of the hallucination or the vision of the baseball field, like over in a certain location. There's the lights, but around the lights, there are what we would consider to be like sundogs or halos that we see in the sky, right? And the FPV angel people talk about these a lot in relation to the location of particle accelerators. So it made me start to think that maybe baseball diamonds, at least Major League Baseball diamonds, are often constructed over areas where there are particle accelerators under the ground. And that is part of the magnetism that draws people in, and that creates sort of this temporal bubble where people are able to go and like remember old times or dream into the future, because that seems to be sort of the energy of that kind of thing, right? Think about, like every time I go to Dodger Stadium, I remember being there as like a 3 or 4 year old with my grandfather and all of that kind of stuff. And it, when you taste the hot dog and everything, it kind of is like a time travel experience. And it, like there is sort of this bubble or this dome around these stadiums. And so I was curious as to, if you look into their theories about particle accelerators and about Walter Russell, it's all about like electromagnetism, right? And what draws things towards something, or, energy fields that are created around it. So I thought that was kind of interesting right off the bat. I saw those there and I thought about that. And these people, these supposedly dead people who are sort of hiding in time or outside of time or whatever, they're all wanting to come and play. Like he keeps saying throughout the movie, how many people really want to come play here? They want to keep playing and never stop. And it made me think about when we had Rico on the show and he talked about like extending play for as long as you can. Like the idea is to keep playing endlessly, right? And that sort of keeps one alive and sort of fresh and moving forward and whatnot. So I was thinking about that. And then there's this incredible scene sort of in the middle of the movie where they're at the PTA, right? And they're having a fight over censorship and mind control and all of that kind of stuff, which is exactly the fight that we're having right now, right? About like what things can be talked about, what things can't be talked about. Is this Nazi Germany? All this kind of stuff. Like that's right there in the middle of the movie, as well as obviously and then from that conversation starts the direction towards Terrence Mann, who is this character that I, kind of talked about a little bit earlier, who's sort of related to this social activism kind of thing that has been really, really perverted. But the other thing that was interesting that was going on sort of parallel to this is you have his wife's brother who can't see the action going on the baseball field, right? He'll walk through the baseball field, screwing up their game, bumping into people and not even notice it. And he's like emblematic of what we call like the NPCs, or like the brain dead people who just can't see what's going on right now with all the nonsense, right? So it was kind of very prescient for like what we're dealing with right now. There's also the topic of like taking people's land and people like giving up their dreams to conform to what society says they should do. And like, what is it we're really supposed to be doing and what matters? And these are all things that have been really central to what we've been living through for the last year and a half, whatnot. All the baseball players who seemed to show up on this field were baseball players who somehow had been like wronged or misperceived in their time, or didn't get to have the finish or the notoriety that they want. They had been sort of misunderstood or treated unfairly by the system in some way, or didn't get their shot. And I thought they just wanted to play. Like they didn't really care about any of that stuff. They just wanted to play the game again, right? They loved to play. And, we talk constantly about like how important it is to play, right? Like when you stop playing, you're kind of like, it's sort of over. Let's see, I have one more bit of notes here. Oh, this idea of, back to the Busfield character who can't see it, you sort of have to like believe it to see it, right? And when you're talking about stuff like time travel or dimensional travel, or even some aspects, Michael, the way we play the Glass Bead Game, like people who don't believe it are like, oh, those are all just coincidences, right? But, we see meaning in it, right? And we've talked about the way we are doing this. It's like based on synchronicity, the interconnectedness of all things, and, sort of like synthesizing a decadent past due garbage culture into something meaningful. And that meaningful is creating like a lot of purpose and energy and whatnot for us. And it dawned on me about halfway through this movie that these guys were playing the Glass Bead Game. They were following synchronicities, right? They were following like links and coincidences and things that they thought they were connected and clues. And even if that clue wasn't exactly right, it led them to the next thing, which created the next set of events. And literally it was like, whenever you or I have a day where we're sort of like, it's super glass beady, that's how it goes. We're just following the synchronicities and the connections, and it's leading to experiences that other people might think are non-existent or stupid, but it's creating a tremendous amount of meaning for us, right? And for the other people who are playing with us, right? And so there they have this field where all of these people who, you know, are interconnected throughout time come to sort of play their version of the glass bead game. And of course, the baseball is the bead. And it was like, you know, you and I have talked about how cool it would be if you could just kind of drop into any city and find the people who also play the glass bead game. And then from there, it helps you sort of navigate yourself, you know, to where you want to be in space and time and whatnot. So I thought this was kind of a beautiful explanation of it. And then just for you, Michael, I did this one. So his wife in the movie, Amy Madigan, the first moment I saw her, the very moment I saw her, I was like, she looks like someone. She looks like someone, right? Who does she look like? And I realized, I think she looks like an actress named Amy Adams. And so I went and I looked up Amy Adams, right? And if you look at Amy Adams when she was younger and you look at this per Amy Madigan, they look almost exactly the same. And what show is Amy Adams in?
I don't know.
The Office.
The Office? Amy Adams was in The Office?
Yep.
What character?
I don't know. I've never watched The Office.
The first season or the second season, right?
Right.
Maybe Amy Adams is not who I think. So all roads do go to
you have to look at the
either directly.
It's Katie. If you look at her when she's young, she looks exactly like Amy Madigan. When she got older, she's gained a little weight and the way her face filled out is different. But if you look at her in her early roles, she looks exactly like Amy Madigan. And Amy Madigan is married to Ed Harris, who's been the voice of God in these movies, right? Who is Amy Adams married to?
I don't know.
We're looking it up. But you've talked about The Office and its relationship.
Yes, I'm seeing. I don't even remember the episodes in which she was on, but she definitely was on.
Who is she married to?
Darren Lagallo.
She's married to someone named Darren Lagallo. And who is Darren Lagallo? Let's see if we can figure out anything about him. Oh, he's an interesting looking guy.
He kind of looks like Brad Pitt.
Name for herself. Let's see. Where does it say anything about her husband? Is he an actor?
He is.
Artist. We'd have to look him up. Let's look up Darren Lagallo. But my guess would be we might find some interesting stuff there. Anywho, so that last one was just for you, Michael, because I couldn't remember the other day how I'm like, dude, that dude from Twin Peaks looks like L. Ron Hubbard. It was like the same thing. I'm like, this chick looks like someone else I've seen, right?
Definitely.
I know you love that stuff. So there you go.
Oh, Catherine, her husband, her Amy Adams' father was in the military.
Of course. But what about Darren Lagallo?
I'm looking it up.
Okay.
Give me a minute.
He went to school in Texas, that's for certain.
It's Lagallo, yeah. He went to school in Texas. He's a painter. I wonder if he paints fields. I wonder if he's like a Bob Ross. All right, let's see. He's an actor. He was in Date Night. He was in 6 Feet Under, and he was in Date Night, Trouble with the Curve, Lullaby. They met in acting classes in 2001. So that's back to that loop of time that you were talking about, Michael. He's an artist. He makes stuff, which includes visual art and music. His work he makes electronic music. It can be found on SoundCloud. He makes dreamlike paintings, which delve into emotional states and the subconscious mind. Well, wouldn't that be what this movie was all about? Very interesting. Okay. So anyway, that would have to be kind of a separate dig, but I thought you might find that little gem interesting. So
definitely.
Your responses, please, gentlemen.
Howdy.
That's a ton of interesting stuff. What did I write? I wrote it down. What was I going to say here? I guess the first question I have, Emily, is when you were packaging this together and we're sort of we're taking the baseball card story now, the story of, how Honus Wagner becomes sort of, because he was the first one to sign a sponsorship deal with Louisville Slugger in like 1905. And then he doesn't want to be a part of the tobacco company's cards, yet his card oddly becomes the very thing he doesn't want. This idea of this almost don't watch what you think for, but watch what you wish for and what you don't want, because you might get them both.
Yeah. So how are you saying, like, so how I packaged what with the comparison?
Yeah, just so like how are you seeing the sort of the strangeness of Wagner's, the reason the card is so valuable is because it's become so rare because he didn't want his card in circulation. And so that very thing that he was trying to stop has created the exact opposite of what he was trying to do.
Correct. So like, I guess, like, I think we see like a lot of that, like, people become sort of famous for one thing, but infamous for something else. And that infamy lives on, right? And so somebody who also was a Hall of Fame baseball player thought he was a perfect baseball player, but that's not what he's known for, right? And so in my head, just because it was such a close time, so there's a couple things. Simone Biles, while not my like style of a gymnast that I like, is like by far, like, she just does things other people just will probably never be able to do. The greatest gymnast in history. She's also been touched by the sexual abuse scandal, right? Which kind of tagged her a little bit onto the Me Too movement, which she kind of resisted the urge to go too far into that. But then this other thing that happened, and there's a lot behind it, right? Like, I could sit down and show you how I think this was all pre-planned, and it serves many narratives, and there's many things afoot here, right? But she is not a mentally ill person. She's not, just like he was not a smoker, right? But forevermore, she will be famous as the person who gave up the gold medal to take care of her mental health, and therefore encouraging everybody else in this age where we're all about to be considered mentally ill if we don't want certain, health interventions or whatever, right? That she was, super important in bringing this idea forward of mental health being more important and whatnot, which I'm 100% sure is not something she wants to be known for. But there's an entire industry behind her, just like there was an industry behind him that said that pushing forward of certain ideas, smoking, drinking, whatever else these kind of endorsements were part of what we wanted to push into this. And he became the vehicle through which that was done. Right. And so nobody talks about the fact that he was nearly a perfect player. That was just one sentence, 10 articles down. And instead, all the focus is on this card, which was his manager card. It wasn't even about when he was a player. And she's getting all this attention for basically not playing. Right. But their names now are forever paired with something that either at the time they definitely didn't like, or definitely in the future, they might really not like that their name got paired with that. Right. And so that was kind of, and then the only reason that I even started thinking about that was because the headline on ESPN was that his baseball card was the GOAT. Right. And Simone Biles is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Her leotard says so. Right. And also her tour. And I'm just going to show this to Howdy, because I felt pretty good when I found this, when I was covering this a few weeks ago, here from May 27th, 2021 on Business Wire, announcing Athleta is now presenting it. That wasn't originally the case. She just recently switched from Nike to Athleta. So originally when the Olympics were in 2020, it would not have been them supporting this, but the Gold Over America Tour, so the GOAT. And if you look down here, it talks about how the purpose of this, the show emerges from their personal values of empowerment, friendship, positive body image, mental health awareness, and self-confidence, right? So this is Athleta, I don't know if you've seen any of their campaigns, but it's all about that stuff right now. One would never have associated Simone Biles with any of those things necessarily, but on May 27th, 2021, so before the Olympics, they were already starting to promote this show as related to mental health awareness. What better advertisement for the show than her having a mental health breakdown at the Olympics? right? There's a lot more stuff I could get into. But him, you know, it just, to me, those scratched of the same itch. So that was kind of how I ended up with those kind of boxed together.
Anything else, Howdy? So I kind of like Howdy. I was drawn into, and I thought it was a really interesting observation about the nature of you know, when does play stop becoming play? Like at one point you play baseball just because you love the sport of baseball. And then if you're like really, really good at it, like then you become a professional and then it changes. That changes. And so like, and we could even, and I want to put that like all in context of everything which is happening right now. And just not bigger than sports, but just the idea of play and like when it becomes work and then becomes like something else. And the card is a great, you're pointing out that irony. And interestingly enough, Archie Graham's brother, the UNC president, one of the things he was very well known for was called the Graham Plan, which was all about reform in college athletics and kind of dealing with what is the role of athletics within, you know, society and within college in general. We have right now going on in the world right now college athletes can have endorsement deals. So this whole thing seems to be coming into play. And it was an interesting observation also about, you know, the competition, moving from competitions to showcases. And that's a little bit of the history of baseball, particularly Howdy could talk about, I'm certain, like the expeditions, which they did like in the 1800s, where they would just travel and play expeditions. What's the word? I'm not saying it right. I got one of the syllables wrong. Exhibition. Thank you. But like that idea of where dealing with like real world competition play. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind right now. And you pointed out all of these different ways in which we're seeing it show itself in other ways in the mundane reality. I found that very, very interesting.
The other thing that was kind of interesting is if you look at the time period when he was like the manager, a little bit his career, but into the manager time, it was that early 1900s time when a lot of these expositions and expos and whatever were sort of going on, right? So there was, it kind of over, you know, I think like 1914 is a big year in that, right? And this was like, it said sometime between 1911 and 1918 was when, or 1909 and 1911 was when this card was in circulation. So it's kind of at that same sort of point of like repainting history and sort of turning it from one thing into another. But your point about the college athletics is really good. And one of the things that's occurring right now because of that, with college athletes being able to take endorsements, is a lot of the girls who competed or in this Olympics, or maybe didn't compete in the Olympics, but had been amateur until now and are about to go to college, they will be participating in this tour. And in the past, if the girls wanted to compete in college, they either couldn't participate in the tours or they couldn't be paid for it. Well, now they're able to be paid. So this tour, the GOAT Tour, is sort of like a celebration or a bridging of the movement of college gymnastics as well, from competitive and amateur into professional and paid. And the person who's choreographing the whole tour, who I've spoken endlessly about in my own material, is Valerie Kondos, former coach of UCLA, famous choreographer who really moved gymnastics in college from being something that was just about regular competition into something that was a show, that was entertaining. She is a fabulous choreographer. She has some unusual threads that I've pulled on that you know, ring of lots of other things we've looked at. But she would really be the person who has been the artist of the architect of moving gymnastics into that space, from competition to entertainment, artistic kind of thing.
Just one thing, just to clarify, because you're talking about the card being a manager card for Honus Wagner, but I'm pretty sure the manager of most of those years is Fred Clark, an outfielder for the Pirates. So Wagner, I think, was a manager 1916, 1917, maybe for just part of a season. So I'm pretty sure Fred Clark was the manager of the Pirates for most of that time.
So I think it said in the article, I can't remember if it was the article that you sent or the one I read about the goat thing, that like the card that is actually the T206 card is his manager card, not his player card.
Because that seems strange if he was never a manager.
That's what the article said. So yeah, I don't know enough about baseball, but we read that about the manager card, right? You were reading it with me, right?
Right. I'm just passing that on for others who are watching this, who, can look into maybe why the article would say that.
He was known as the Flying Dutchman.
Yeah.
Anyway, just came to mind.
Okay. I may have had, it's possible I have it incorrect, but it was from one of the articles. So anyway, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent presentation, Emily.
Yep.
All righty. Howdy. Take it away.
Okay, so the reason I went third is because I've been away without internet access for 2 weeks and had some stressful things going on in my life. So I thought I just piled in a bunch of things sort of from my own mind. I looked a bit on the internet this morning for a couple of extra little pieces, but so I'm just going to throw some ideas out there and then we can play with what I've thought about. So the first was the movie Field of Dreams itself, because the playing of the game is so symbolic, I think, along with the card right now, because this idea that still is baseball is supposed to be America's pastime. It's supposed to be the thing that is like this thing that lets you know everything is okay. If they're playing baseball games, everything is fine. This is the sort of mentality I think that they're trying to present, right? This idea, and of course, baseball is a strange sport because it's one of the few sports that's not timed. It's one of the few sports that are actually set up for conversation as a fan. It's one of the few sports where the game continually breaks, and it's almost like you're expected to be having a running conversation with the person sitting beside you about not just the game, but anything. So the whole sport is a very unique, and I know Michael did a really good presentation a while ago on all the really interesting occult pieces to baseball. So that was the first sort of a package. Okay, so Field of Dreams. We'll start with one baseball scene that nobody remembers from the movie. And that's when young Archie Graham comes to the field and sees there's more players now than just the White Sox. They brought this other team to play. And he instantly points out 3 players. That's Smokey Joe Wood, Mel Ott, and Gil Hodges. Okay, so the first question is, well, out of all of the great baseball players in history, why are they signaling out Joe Wood, Mel Ott, and Gil Hodges, which are also strange because they played in 3 completely different eras almost. So Joe Wood, for those who don't know, was a great pitcher with the Boston Red Sox and had dueled Walter Johnson for a number of years for wins and strikeouts. And then I think he slipped on some grass or he slipped on some stairs, broke his pitching thumb, tried to come back and pitch, kind of couldn't. His career was pretty much over. He did come back and play as an outfielder for a few years with the Cleveland Indians. Amazingly hit like 280 for a few years. But so the story of so here's Joe Wood who was like the best pitcher along with Johnson at the time, has this accident, and in a sense his great pitching career is over. So this idea of returning, of this dreamlike quality of getting to do it one more time. Mel Ott, of course, well, he had a great long career, 500 home runs, but he was very, very small. He was like 5'7" or something, and like a little tiny guy. And so the fact that he was hitting all these home runs seemed strange at the time, when the big home run hitters of the 1920s were sort of giant muscle men compared to Ott, who was this little tiny, perfectly timed swinger. So that maybe that's for a reason for his inclusion. And then Gil Hodges is really strange because very few baseball people, in a sense, they hear the name, but they don't really know Gil Hodges, because all the other players in the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1950s were sort of got all the spotlight, be it Duke Snider, Jackie Robinson, or Roy Campanella. But Hodges died early. He died at 47. I can't remember what he died from, but he died very, very early. So in a sense, they're showcasing in some way baseball players who were stars that were overlooked somehow, that for some reason at the time they were there. Lou Gehrig wasn't there. Babe Ruth wasn't on the field. They were clear they didn't want Ty Cobb there. They didn't want, so it's like, so here were these players that me as a baseball historian, I know who they are, but probably a lot of other people who even follow baseball would have never heard those 3 names before, perhaps. So it was interesting that those are the three names that they chose to include, specifically point out as other ghost players in the movie. So as it came to the movie itself, my first question always when I was watching Field of Dreams is, why do magical movies have to sort of take place in Iowa? What is it about Iowa that creates that Field of Dreams has to be there? That Bridges of Madison County has to take place there. That novel, and we can say novel, not necessarily the movie, because why do novel writers seem to have to put this sort of magical, fanciful, special aura on Iowa? Almost like if you say, I'm writing a story and it takes place in Iowa, there's going to be magic in the story. And I don't have an answer for that. So you guys can talk about that later. Why you think Iowa is, or write that down so you don't forget it. Why is Iowa this place that they want to have a place of magic? And the place where the Field of Dreams is supposed to have been in, which is Dyersville, right? I don't know if you've had a chance to look into it. They've got one of the largest Gothic cathedrals there, the St. Francis Xavier Gothic Cathedral. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. And of course has this strange building story of these German immigrants, and they've got to build this cathedral in the 1880s. And I mean, when you look at the town itself, yeah, it's a town in Iowa. And then they've got this, Czech style cathedral that should be in Prague or something, right? So that came up. So then we switched to the last piece about from Field of Dreams I want to bring up, and that's the idea of the Mandela Effect. Because the Field of Dreams movie itself is one of the things that comes up with a Mandela Effect, where people question what is the line that's being said in the movie. Is it, if you build it, he will come, or if you build it, they will come, right? There's this confusion around it. And for me, always with a Mandela Effect, when I'm looking into it, it's what would make the most sense from the standpoint, if actually it's a movie, from the plot of the movie or the lyrics in the song. Like, it obviously makes sense that the woman in the James Bond movie has to have the braces. It doesn't make sense if she just smiles. It makes no sense to the plot. She had to have had braces. So same thing in this case. Well, it has to be, if you build it, he will come, because the whole point of the movie is leading to the meeting with the father, not with Shoeless Joe Jackson, right? This is a chance for, really, the movie isn't about the Black Sox and Jackson. It's about Kinsella meeting his father again and repairing a relationship that was lost when the father died. So, but when we take Mandela Effect, well, we have James Earl Jones in the movie, and James Earl Jones, right, being Darth Vader, and there's another line that's constantly questioned of what does he say to Luke and being his father. So we've got right away, the movie has two Mandela Effects. You had Burt Lancaster. Wasn't Burt Lancaster? Because he was in Ben-Hur, right? He was Burt Lancaster. What was the movie Burt Lancaster was in that I'm tracking from the 1950s? It was another type Mandela Effect movie, but I just can't think of it off the top of my head.
I'm looking for you.
Yeah. So the question becomes, in this sense, why are these sort of Mandela Effect connections associated with Field of Dreams, and really when you have like that meeting with the doctor Moonlight Graham on the street, when Ray meets him, becomes a very interesting, also not just time travel, but it can be seen, I think, in this Mandela Effect context somehow, that there is a something about it is going into this movie, and I don't know why they wanted to put the Mandela Effect into the movie. I'll just sort of skip through a few things to kind of give us something to do.
So oddly enough, about Burt Lancaster, they don't show a filmography of his on his website, on Wikipedia page, which every other actor we ever look at, there's no list. So I'd have to go through and read everything. So that's hard to do. But there's plenty of other stuff here on his page that we can dig into. So when you're finished, let me know. And then I can tell you about that if you like.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, it's a very, not only, of course, was he a great actor, but he's if I remember, he's linked to some really interesting movies that are worth discussing. But again, I didn't have the internet, so I'm having to do this pretty much off the top of my head.
That was pretty good without the internet.
Okay, so Honus Wagner card. of course, we have why does it have to sell for 6.606 million as we, why do they have to make sure that that's the number that the card goes for? But when it came to Wagner's two pieces, his first name, of course, is Johannes. So we have John showing up, this famous word linking into supposedly the Priory of Sion and the linking of the famous Gnostic and Knights Templar teachers who would always take the name John if they were John, or Joan if you were a female, because women could be the head of these organizations. So we have that. Of course, the main character is John Kinsella, the father that's Ray is coming back to meet. So it's just interesting that I'm noticing that John is popping up. Wagner's nickname, which maybe I didn't know, but he was known as the Flying Dutchman, which is a very odd nickname to have as a baseball player. They claim that he got it from something that had been in a Wagner opera, and that somehow something in this Wagner opera connected back to Wagner, and so they called him the Flying Dutchman, trying to link to supposed German heritage, but Dutch is not German by any stretch of the imagination. But when we think of the Flying Dutchman, if you actually say that to the person on the street, that will be the famous mysterious ship, right? The ship that would supposedly be appearing in the Atlantic or something with no people on board, sort of like a ghost ship, right? That the Flying Dutchman, if you had seen a ghost ship, you'd seen the Flying Dutchman, right? At least I think that's what it is. I've got the internet right now. And I think if it's a ship, right? If that's what it is, the legendary ghost ship, which was said never to be able to make port, doomed to sail the oceans and seas forever. Supposedly a myth originating from the 17th century of the Dutch East India Company. Okay, so here's Honus Wagner, who was easily, along with Cobb and Blajoui, the best hitter of his day and an outstanding fielder. So how he gets the name the Flying Dutchman, so again, linking to ghosts. So that's Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams is sort of a happy ghost movie instead of a scary ghost movie. It's here the ghosts are all coming back to fulfill their own wishes and their own dreams, and in a sense, fulfill wishes of still living people, in fact, living people they never met. And so Wagner has this connection with the name, with the Flying Dutchman. Last thing I picked up here was, of course, the story in 1919 itself, right? The actual story of the Chicago White Sox team that was linked into the story, in which many of the players cheated quite clearly in order to lose the series with the Cincinnati Reds. Of course, Jackson, it's because he batted so well and played well in the games, it's hard to know who or what was involved, but we're dealing with the reason they even wanted to do it is because their owner was so cheap and was just giving them no money whatsoever. And so this was the only way they could actually bring some money back into their pocket for playing baseball. It's because, though, of the Black Sox situation that in 1920 they changed the ball. They changed because this was still in the dead ball era. And the next year, Babe Ruth has been sold to the New York Yankees. The new lively ball comes in, and all of a sudden we go from dead ball era to pretty much modern baseball, what we think of as modern baseball with the home run in place. All of a sudden, within 1 year, Ruth hits 58 home runs in 1920, 59 and 21 or something. And all of a sudden you've got an explosion of a totally new type of baseball, but that wouldn't have happened, oddly, without this sort of black mark on baseball that the commissioner and the money people felt they needed to change the mindset to get people to feel excited about going to the game again. So in a sense, the game changed because of what happened there. The game you watch today is absolutely linked to what happened in 1919. So off the top of my head, when I put those two things together, that's what I came up with. And so I'll see where that conversation takes Emily and Michael.
Michael, can I go first?
Go right ahead.
All right. So just on the last piece there about the ghost ship, right? So the same person, right? So during the same conversation last week in the Project Kids group with the same person who talked about Ray Liotta and Joe Jackson separately, there was also a conversation about the ghost ship warehouse fire in Oakland from a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that. There was this warehouse called the Ghost Ship Warehouse where there was like raves and stuff like that. And there was this really bad fire. And when they went in, like there was all this weird, like very occult stuff there. And there was tremendous amount of interesting stories that were generated by this. Most of them have been removed from the internet. But what a lot of people also didn't know is there was also a ghost ship warehouse in Los Angeles. I've been to parties there, and it's a very strange interdimensional portal. I can tell you that for sure, right? So that was kind of what came. It's just funny that was part of the same conversation. The ghost ship warehouse was part of the same conversation with the same person who brought up Ray Liotta and Joe Jackson, completely outside of this context. Right. So your connection with him to Ghost Ship is just, it's a weird synchronicity, but that's how we sort of play the game. And then what you were just saying about changing the nature of the sport to sort of recast it and give it a different feel. One of the things in the article I read about the Field of Dreams thing that you sent was how this game turned into almost like a home run derby, right? With Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton and all of them hitting all those home runs in the last inning.
Yeah. And a sort of magical ending, almost like it's a scripted ending. It's like it wasn't even a real game almost. It's like you couldn't have an ending like that of a game like this.
The walk-off home run, like that was the headlines I had seen come into my feed.
Right.
But Aaron Judge hitting all these home runs at the very end of the game. I mean, one can say, okay, maybe it's Judgment Day or whatever. And you have Giancarlo, like, just these huge big guys that are like almost like godlike characters or whatever, hitting all these home runs. And the home run derby is another version of like the Gold Over America tour, where it's like taking something from that was competitive and moving it into an entertainment thing where it's like only seeing the fun part. Like the fun part is when the people hit the home runs, right? Like, and that's what like your novice baseball player watcher just wants to see is home runs hit, right? So it's kind of like feeding candy to the children, right? So it's part of that sort of commercialization or entertainment, moving it even further towards that, with that sort of scenario. So those were kind of my thoughts about what you said about the Honus Wagner thing. And then back to the Field of Dreams. I have a lot of notes here that are written all in a circle, so it might not be in correct time. I'm just going to start where I start with it. But these players were all ones who like something. There was something left unresolved about their career, the ones who came back. And these were the people who maybe never got some of the fame of some of the others. Maybe they wanted it, maybe they didn't, but they just really loved to play, right? These are the glass bead players, as Michael and I would say, right? The point for them is just to get to continue playing. That's all they want to do. They're out there, they're coming back every day, more and more of them. They're out there just for the joy of playing. They'll play with people who aren't as good as them. They'll whatever it is, they want to play the game, and somehow they got wrapped up in the commercialization of the sport and the making of stars and non-making of stars and all of that kind of stuff. So not only did they maybe never get their due, but they also just didn't get to play the way that they wanted to play. So I thought that was interesting. I was unclear. You also had this part you said about baseball being unique because it's not timed and because it is almost set up to have like conversations in between plays, right? Well, the two others, so there's three sports that I'm obsessed with and I talk about, baseball being the least, but I do talk about it. The other two are tennis and gymnastics, and they're similar. They also have breaks where you are able to talk about the last point or the last routine, right? And have some of these interesting characters. It was unclear to me from the movie if the point is that his father, his dream had been to be a baseball player and he gave it up so that when he returned, he was doing the thing he always wanted to do. Is that what it was? Like he wasn't really a baseball player in real life, was he?
Yeah, he supposedly the character had been a minor league player in the Yankee system, but just had never made it to the majors.
Okay, so I was just curious about that. I wanted to ask. So then you asked about the whole thing with the magic of Iowa, right? Why is this? Right? Whenever you have one of these magic movies. Well, I went to Iowa for the first time last year. Last year at Thanksgiving, I drove from Los Angeles to Iowa with Laura. And the moment we passed from Nebraska into Iowa, it felt different. Like literally, you cross the state line, there's a completely different vibration and frequency. And we're driving on the highway through all these kind of cornfields and things like this. And I'm seeing these farms that look a lot like that, but a lot of them are on mounds. And I'm like, dude, I think there's some stuff under the ground there, man. Like this feels very time travel-y to me. And one of the weirdest things that I saw, And apparently there was a couple of them at this point around, but there was one in particular that I saw both on the way into town, way in Iowa, and then when we were leaving and came back out the same way, there was a gigantic billboard of Tulsi Gabbard, that's Tulsi Gabbard for president, in the middle of a cornfield. And this was many, many, many months. The election was already over. It was Thanksgiving. So election was over. Joe Biden had won. But Tulsi Gabbard had dropped out many, many months before, right? So I started playing with this idea that like Iowa, some kind of like dimensional or time travel place. And maybe there was like some other reality where Tulsi Gabbard was president. And she has her own set of problems that are sometimes less apparent than other people's, but arguably at least some of the things she says make a little more sense than some of the things the other politicians say. So maybe a slightly more sensible reality exists in the fields of Iowa. I even did a show about this with John Brisson, about the Tulsi Gabbard time travel Iowa cornfield theory, right? And these were the hugest billboards you've ever seen. I've never seen a billboard for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anyone else that was this big and majestic looking. And there was nothing else there in the middle of the field, just the Tulsi Gabbard billboard, right? And there is a weird like a feeling there, right? And a person, I think we all know, I know that Michael and I have both done shows with her, but I don't know if you've done yet. I don't know if you know who Nish is. Nish is also from Iowa, right? And Nish is one of the people who has the same birthday as Laura. And she's from Iowa, and she's very into like magic and the dream world and the death world and all of this kind of stuff. She actually used to own a temple in Des Moines that was very kind of that sort of Gothic-y. That's kind of her whole vibe, right? So when we were in Iowa this past time, I met a friend of hers, and meeting this friend was kind of like getting like a distilled drop of what the underground art and music culture of Iowa or Des Moines is like, right? And this person also fascinated with death and the afterlife and time and all of this kind of stuff. So Iowa is this strange place, right? I don't know if the corn somehow like resonates in a way that makes time penetrable. I mean, think about what's gone on with like Native Americans, and like they ate maize and corn, and part of their health problems and issues have been eating wheat instead and whatnot. And then of course we have done this gross GMO thing with corn, and they use it for gas for cars. Like this is a magic alchemical substance of sorts, right? Think about the way it's been perverted into high fructose corn syrup and all of this stuff that's gone on. But like corn obviously has some form of magical properties that everybody is vying to take ownership of. And here you have Iowa where all of that is produced, and there's, you know, corn everywhere. And of course, sometimes the field looks green, like an emerald field of green, right? And then other times it looks very, you know, yellow or hay kind of color, dependent on the time of the harvest and whatnot. But I don't know. I think that there's some sort of alchemical thing going on in Iowa, maybe because of the corn, that creates temporal or dimensional distortions that can be played with. And I think that is also why the magical ritual of every beginning political or election season begins in Iowa, right? It's a way, yeah. Right. So that, and then my last point was about your Mandela effects and Burt Lancaster, right? And if we go to Burt Lancaster's Wikipedia page, like I couldn't find the movie you were looking for because there's no filmography, which is unusual. But look, he was in the circus. The last show we did was about the circus, right? And then you have here Burt Lancaster doing gymnastics on the horizontal bar as part of the Federal Theater Project. He's doing gymnastics. And I talked about gymnastics in relationship to the baseball and whatnot, right? Literally, that's him on the high bar. Him and his friend Cravat or something like that, right? And he's got all sorts of interesting movies, but I'd have to read through them. They're not in a list. Like, oh my God, look, Michael, Crisscross. So one of the links that our package sending friend sent to us linked us to this video of a girl doing the crisscross applesauce movements and rhyme in a nursery school. So I don't know what all of this means, but I found this when I went looking at Burt Lancaster's Wikipedia page. I couldn't find the thing that you were speaking of, but I found him doing gymnastics, and that he had been in the circus with Nick Cravat, who also he's doing the high bar with, and that he was in something. Lancaster made a film noir, Crisscross, in 1945. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting names here of things he's done and things he's been involved with. We could probably dig into the title of all of them. He actually did a lot of stuff with United Artists, which came up in reference to my cousin that we talked about, William Crissell, Michael, and his father was the emissary to China and also worked at United Artists, right? Like, so there's a lot of little things that connect that come up here. I'd have to do a deeper dive. I've never been really that interested in Burt Lancaster, but look at this, the Birdman of Alcatraz, Michael.
Oh, yeah.
Birdman of Alcatraz. I mean, there's a really interesting things here. Judy Garland, he was in Child Was Waiting with Judy Garland, right? Of course, I played Judy Garland in the movie as a child, right? So like, there's all sorts of fun stuff we could have here on his page. So maybe we'll have to do that. But I just thought you would find that sort of read into Iowa. That was kind of my read into why it has to be Iowa. And for me, like Nish and Laura are two of the most magical people that I know, and I associate them both with Iowa, right? Magical in totally different ways, but Nish really in that way that you're describing, right? Like that is what her whole reality is kind of about that. You know, Nish? Have you been on with her?
No.
Maybe I should hook you two up. I think you guys might have a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Anywho, Michael?
So Howdy, that was, as always, thought-provoking. A couple points, which I'll just share because, you know, we've been talking for a while. Burt Lancaster, I'm not particularly knowledgeable. Like, I know who he is from maybe a general cultural reference. I might be able to answer a Jeopardy question about it. But I think that this might be an accurate statement. He's probably, like, his most iconic movie or role might be From Here to Eternity, where he and the woman are like lying in an embrace on the beach. And so I like that idea of like the Field of Dreams and From Here to Eternity, like in terms of like, you know, pastime, eternal, like, you know, so we've got kind of those sort of plays. And then like phenomenal like linkage of like two of the biggest Mandela examples are like tied into this movie, the movie itself, and then like James Earl Jones. And both of those, like, they kind of mark the bookends of the 80s. The line from Empire Strikes Back that came out in May 1980, and then like May 1989 is when we get Field of Dreams. So like all of that's in place. So all of that, like, you got me thinking. Like I wrote down notes, and I would have liked to have gone into like a discussion for each one, but we don't have the time for that. I love this like how you began with the with this idea of like baseball as this like numbing age, like emotional numbing agent. Like, as long as you play a baseball, everything's okay. Everything is okay. And like how that has been used. But then I don't know if you answered this. I'm going to end this with like a question because there was a lot. I may have been taking note. You brought up, like, you know, the significance of the 666 tied to the card, but why do you think that? Like, what, from your opinion, what do you think the symbology of how it's being used is 666 and to Wagner? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, why is that?
Yeah, it honestly, it made no sense when I saw the number, as that's the sale. It seemed so bizarre. Like, why, for a baseball card story, do they need that number to show up in it? And you know, I guess one of the things, when you think about like someone our age, we might have collected baseball cards. I had thousands of hockey and baseball cards when I was a kid. Kids today don't, like, in the modern era, you don't really collect baseball cards anymore. It's not really something that anyone does anymore. I think they still sell them, but, you know, but in our day, that was without the internet. If you wanted to remember what a guy looked like, you needed the baseball card or a book or whatever. And so they had more importance on day-to-day sort of memory, day-to-day activity of connecting you with the game. So there was like I don't want to call them a portal, but in a way, they were the thing that kept the sport alive for you when you couldn't. There was many games on TV. You would usually have to listen to them on the radio. It was a way that you sort of kept the image of the player and the game around you particularly like in the even before TV, back in the days of radio, the cards would have been really important, especially if you didn't live in a major league city. That was the only way you could get a kind of image along with your what was in your newspaper of what was going on. So it was almost like this way of building the mat, because that's one of the other interesting things for me anyway about baseball, is that it's the only sport I would rather listen to on the radio than watch. Because if I watch baseball on television, actually even go to the games, it loses some magic that I get from listening to the game on the radio, because the game can be on, I can do 2 or 3 or 4 different things, and it still is able to be easily manufactured by my mind into like a workable image of what I'm seeing. I listen to a lot of games on the radio of other sports, but only baseball seems to fit perfectly. That not like you have to be focused and actually listen to the game. You can literally be doing something. You can actually be involved in a chore, and the game is there, and you're still, it's like you're still seeing it. So there's a real interesting overlap. Of course, I know, Michael, you did the thing too, but we had found the information on Barry Fell and his book about these old petroglyphs that were found in Arizona or Nevada or something that seemed to indicate very early baseball type games that were being played by the maybe pre-native Indians or the Anasazi. So again, it's this idea of, is the sport of baseball really invented in the 1800s, or is it like this really ancient game somehow because of all the mathematics and the geometry and everything else that fits into it? It seems too random to have kind of just been all of a sudden manufactured. It seems like it's got to be something that's gone through centuries of refinement before it could be brought. So again, it's this idea of this, is there some sort of odd magic? But the magic seems to be waning, because that Field of Dreams game, there was an exhibition, there's an exhibition football game taking place the same day. It got, I think, twice the viewers that the Field of Dreams game got on TV. So a football game that wasn't even a regular season game, more people watched that. So I think it's also indicating that something about the way the modern population see baseball in the United States has changed greatly from the way they saw it in the 1920s or the 1930s or whatever.
That's an interesting point. I don't have a narrative for it, but like just a data point. I was doing a little bit of search. Like I know how Shoeless Joe has been, at least at some point, has been cast as like the bad guy, right? You know, that's part of the story. And then I was doing to see if Shoeless Joe had been in any other like popular culture vehicles. And I guess in the 50s, there was a popular musical called Damn Yankees. And Damn Yankees is a false, like, you know, a deal with the devil kind of, narrative or story plot or plot line. And it deals with baseball. It has to do with baseball. And there's a song in there which is specifically calling out like Shoeless Joe. And so there's kind of like, you know, the 666 deal with the devil, sort of like, I've seen that before. I don't have a connection with it, but it's definitely school for or a place for thought. And also like, you know,
to link it to Honus Wagner, because Honus, I can't see any connection to make it to Honus Wagner at all, even although he's from Pittsburgh, so he's in this Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. He was born in Pittsburgh. Okay, but other than that,
how good? Like I know of like Ty Cobb is like considered the finest, which I'm thinking they're around the same era or time. Like was did you say that Wagner was as good as him? Was he thought of as like the best?
Well, before Babe Ruth came along and sort of took over as the considered best baseball player, there were 3 guys you were dealing with: Honus Wagner, Ty Cobb, and Nap Lajoie.
And who?
Napoleon Lajoie.
I've never even heard of him. And I know a little bit more about baseball than the typical guy.
Yeah, I think he's got 3,500 hits. He played most of his career with the Cleveland Indians. He started with the Athletics before that.
They need to make a movie on him.
They did not make a movie on Lajoie, no.
No, I'm saying they need to.
I guess, but he's maybe not as interesting as the others. But, you know, we have Cobb, who was probably the best pure hitter in the game. But Wagner was able to hit with power, steal bases, field. He would have been like a Gold Glove winning shortstop of his era. So he was like a complete package at the time, even though the Pirates, I think, only went to 2 or 3 World Series during his era. But he would have been considered. It would have been neck and neck at that time. Who's a better player, Cobb or Wagner?
I know Ty Cobb is kind of positioned as being kind of like a nasty person, like, you know, like he would take cheap shots and like, what was Wagner's reputation? Was he a good guy? Was he like, did he have a reputation like that?
As far as I can, when I think of Honus Wagner, what I know, I mean, I've played a lot of baseball in my day and a lot of baseball games and whatever. Wagner to me was always like a really quiet but tough individual. I know he had a dog that he used to bring to games with him, and the dog bit an umpire once, if I remember. That was a story that the umpire threw him out of the game, so his dog bit the umpire. But of course, baseball in the early era was not a gentleman's sport. I mean, it was a war, actually. You know, it was like, you know, Ty Cobb wasn't sharpening his spikes for no reason, and he wasn't the only guy doing it. It was a nasty business at that time. So you couldn't really stick around long if you were going to be too nice. So I mean, Wagner did have a toughness to it. An interesting story about Wagner was he played in the first World Series. It was between Boston and Pittsburgh in 1903, and Wagner played very poorly in that series. And there was supposed to be a portrait that was going into some baseball exhibition or something the next year. And Wagner refused to put it in, refused to let them show it because he had such a bad series. And it wasn't until 1907, 1909 that he played the Tigers and played against Cobb, and Wagner out hit him and won that World Series, the only one he won. So my viewpoint on he also retired in 1908. Some people don't know this. In the middle of his career, before after his best season, he just retired. He didn't want to play anymore. He's young. He's like 28, 29 years old. He said, no one knows why. He just said, I'm done with this. And the owner had to go and sign him to a massive contract at the time to bring him back to play the rest of his career with the Pirates. But he literally just said, no, I'm done. So he's also this sort of really interesting story guy, and maybe I should actually dig up some books on him and read more on Wagner, because he is. It's not the fact that this baseball card is his as the most expensive is not by accident. I think there's something that there is a story that of Honus Wagner that wants to be told, but I can't flesh it out. But if I was going to have a shortstop on my team, yeah, I'd want Honus Wagner.
So,
all right.
A couple of things came up while you guys were talking. That just interestingly enough, what you just said in some ways also connects him to Simone Biles, right? Because she won the Olympics in 2016, and then she stopped for about a year, went around, did all sorts of Hollywood stuff. And part of the reason she sort of got talked into or decided to come back was felt that it was important that there'd be one still active competitive gymnast who had been a victim of Larry Nassar, to make sure USA Gymnastics actually did something about it. But then once she came back, began this whole like turn of like, you know, the Me Too stuff that she kind of was involved in a little bit, and this sort of social activism, social media aspect of her career. So it was almost part of like coming back in to push a narrative, just like after he came back in was when the sponsorship started coming in, right? And it was a big payday, and this was a big payday for her, right? And the other thing that someone pointed out to me, if you guys follow Chris Knowles a lot, he talks about Sybil, and it's like the Sybil being like part of the alchemical process of sort of introducing something into the reality. And if you reverse Simone Biles' name, it's Sybil, right? So it's that same kind of thing. So I'm wondering if he occupied that same sort of territory as an individual through which a lot of ideas were actually introduced. He was almost like I don't know what the sort of esoteric or occult kind of word for this is, but the vessel through which a lot of things flowed, right? So that right there. Michael, considering that you've looked into Lancaster in every single way, you've torn that apart, you've probably never looked deeply into Burt Lancaster. You talk obviously all the time about Lancaster.
Never looked at Burt Lancaster before.
Right, you talk about it all the time. We've talked about, is there a portal connection between Lancaster, California and Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Like I'd be looking at Burt Lancaster maybe to see, and what I'm already just going through the names of his movies, and this is definitely a highly coded career that's even harder to decrypt because it's not listed. You have to go reading through everything and sort of pull it out. It doesn't look like a framework device, but it's very interesting He was also in a movie, just to relate it to what I was just saying about Simone Biles. He was in a movie called Go Tell the Spartans. Michigan State is the Spartans, and Michigan State is where Larry Nassar was working out of when he did all this sexual abuse of the gymnasts, right? Michigan State is also implicated in the Phoenix program with the CIA as far as Vietnam, and that seems to be what this movie is a little bit about. Anyway, just little glass beads there. The 606, the 606, or the 6,606 kind of thing, the card number is T206. And so I thought about, well, like, what is T2? And for some reason, it made me think of Terminator 2, the movie Terminator 2. So I was like, okay, I haven't seen that. Maybe there's something there. But even the word Terminator, what do we call Monsanto seeds? We call them Terminator seeds, right? And corn is one of the first things that GMO and Monsanto was applied to. And then you have Thai cob, and you eat corn as on the cob. So my mind is just doing all this stuff, like I can't help it. And then I had some note over here that I can't remember why I wrote it. There was something about time travel, but I can't quite remember what I was writing. See, everything you guys say is so interesting that it generates multiple ideas for myself as well. But for some reason, this idea of corn, right, of corn being some sort of alchemical, substance, right, or some sort of related to magic, sort of in some way. And you eat popcorn when you go to the movies, and the movie is part of how we've had spells cast over us for our entire lives. You actually, you eat popcorn, and they used to put palm kernel oil on it, right? So you've got like the palms of Hollywood and that kind of stuff saturated over the corn of the field. I mean, I don't know. My mind is just doing all of this stuff, but everything, I mean, beyond our ability to understand almost everything we've all participated in for most of our lives, from the watching of baseball to the watching of movies and the things we consume, the hot dogs, the popcorn, whatever, it's all alchemical ritual, right? It's all bringing about a desired result. So.
All right. Any final words?
I guess the last thing, so everyone can know, the story about the baseball card, though, also hit me in a little different way personally, because when my father had stolen all my money from me that's 1991, I mentioned I had this huge collection, mostly hockey cards. And I needed to sell those cards in order to make some business things and eventually get back to university and whatever. So I sold all of these. I had 10 Wayne Gretzky rookie cards at the time, which is the Honus Wagner baseball cards. I sold them it was about $3,000 I was able to get for this, which is a lot of money in 1991. I think if I'd had that set now, all of those cards, it'd probably be worth $80,000 or $100,000. So it was this, the memory of this card and talking about it has brought back the memory of my having to take what had been a very special thing from my childhood and something I was looking forward to the future with it, and I had to give them all up in very difficult circumstances. And so I'm saying that as a way of sort of cleansing that period from my life and allowing that to flow through me and let that challenge from that time kind of end, the memories of that end. And whoever has the baseball card, I hope you're enjoying it. Whoever has my cards, I hope you're enjoying them as well. I got great joy out of them.
Well, that kind of.
I would suggest that, from just a surface level, take, Field of Dreams is ultimately about the reconciliation between father and son.
The resolution, right, of that. And so through the process of talking about it, you're cleansing some of this. I also just.
There we go.
Because I had just looked it up, that Terminator 2 came out in 1991, which was when that occurred for you. And then I also remembered the time travel thing I wrote down. Did you guys ever see what's considered the time travel play of Derek Jeter? Robert and I showed this on a show one time, where basically he was on one side of the field and suddenly, literally, you see him disappear, and then he's on the other side of the field catching the ball. Have you guys, either of you seen this?
I have not.
I think I've heard of it, but I never saw it.
I'll find the clip and I'll attach it in the show notes and send it to both of you guys, right?
Yeah.
that Derek Jeter play was literally like, where did he go and how is he back? Right. Kind of thing. And he literally, it was like, he was like over by like third base. And in like 1 second, he was over by first base catching the ball. Right. So,
which is so interesting because probably if Wagner is like the greatest known shortstop, Jeter was probably the most overrated shortstop other than in the postseason. But, Jeter was a good hitter, but not the fielder anyone thought he really was.
Maybe they're both time travelers, though. He was the flying.
But if he could time travel on the field, well, that tells you a lot about his longevity because
there we go.
The guy could hit. I'll tell you that.
There you go. All right, guys. I always enjoy doing this with you. So what a fabulous way to spend the morning. Howdy, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, still Howdy McCoskey Talks is there. I'm also now over at freevoice.io. Some stuff's going onto that just to be ready if something happens over at YouTube. And I'm shifting all of my work now over to exitfromthecave.com, which I think is a really smart website title. And my exposition book, I've got a revised edition coming out like in a week. So if you're thinking of actually getting the book, just hold on. It'll be up in about 7 or 10 days, and it's all cleaned up with new editions and new stuff. So it's up to date.
All right, cool. Michael?
Yep.
Any final words?
You can find me at susquehannaalchemy.com or just search that.
All right. And you can find me at
Or just hang out in downtown Scranton. He'll be there.
Hang out. I've never been to Scranton. I'm waiting for an invitation from the mayor, and I would like to receive a key to the city. So if they happen to be listening, or if anyone's listening who's got that connection, like that would get me there. That would get me there.
What's coming in your next package now, Michael.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The head of the mayor.
I'm back. Laura just informed me that actually the reason that
you can find me at emilycmoyer.com. We'll be back in in short order with another round of this. It's my turn to choose next time.
So here we have another overlay of those.
Look forward to doing it with you guys, and we'll see you all later.
I'm really done this
time. Have a good one. Bye. Bye.